David Lange, Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. I've spent 30 years active duty service in the United States Air Force. I've lived in 10 states, 2 foreign countries, and I've been in combat in 2 wars. During my time in service, one of the most startling things that I saw was an attack on my hometown, New York, on September 11th, 2001. As far back as I can remember, I've had a love of aviation and airplanes. In first grade, I actually wrote what I'll call my first series of books. It was a adventure series of 6 books called The Adventures of Pilot Joe, illustrated and with text, of course, and I gave those as a gift to my mother, and she still has those to this very day. Then in 3rd grade, I had my first opportunity to visit an actual aircraft. One of my best friends had an aunt who was a flight attendant for United Airlines, and they invited me to come with them to LaGuardia Airport and to board an aircraft before the passengers were boarded. While on board, we got to go up in the cockpit and talk with the pilots. We learned all about the instruments and what the pilots do. And we also got to do some fun things like use the public address system to make announcements over the aircraft. While there, we got several gifts, and one thing that I received was a little plastic set of wings. It said Future Pilot, and I love those wings, and that always stayed with me, and I still have those plastic wings to this day. As I grew here on Long Island, my dad shared stories with me, a family legend which I didn't know how much was true and how much was make-believe, but he referred to a great uncle of mine, my great-grandfather's brother. His name was Charles E. Taylor, and he told me that Uncle Charlie built the engine for the first Wright brothers airplane and several other aircraft after that. It wasn't until I was in college that I did additional research and found out the true amazing contributions that Charles E. Taylor made to aviation. In fact, he was later inducted into the Aviation Hall of Fame. As I considered careers in aviation, I realized there are several routes to get there. There's a civilian route you can take, and then there's also a military aviation route. In 11th grade, in the summer, my family and I went on a unique vacation to the Soviet Union for 3 weeks. The things I saw on that tour gave me a true appreciation for democracy and what we have in this country, and solidified my decision to go the military route, which is why I applied to and eventually was accepted at the United States Air Force Academy. After graduating from the United States Air Force Academy in 1988, I went first to undergraduate pilot training in Laughlin Air Force Base, Del Rio, Texas. Unfortunately, due to air sickness and some other challenges, I was unsuccessful there, which was to that point in my life my biggest failure and my biggest disappointment, and it was earth-shattering for me. But then, because my grades were so good in pilot school, I managed to get a slot for undergraduate navigator training, where I excelled, and eventually went on to the Combat Crew Training School for KC-135, which is airfielding aircraft, and I was a distinguished graduate from training there. So basically, after my failure, I managed to eventually find my stride, succeed, and I never looked back from that moment. While assigned in the KC-135, I had 3 different bases I was assigned at during my time in the tanker, which lasted approximately 10 years. I flew in 2 wars, Operation Desert Storm in 1991, and then Operation Allied Force, a part of the air war over Kosovo, in 1999. Between that time, I was also involved in a number of humanitarian relief missions where we helped to bring supplies, rice, and medicine to starving people around the world. Desert Storm is interesting. We lived in tents for 3 months while I was deployed for that, which was more of my traditional view of war. During Operation Allied Force, we actually flew out of home base in England, so it was very unusual. I would kiss goodbye to my wife and kids in the early evening, and then I'd go out and fly a combat mission by night and come back at a very early hour in the morning, and then become a dad again, and then have to do it again after that. So that was a quite unusual experience for me. In May of 2000, I completed my last flight in the KC-135 as a navigator. At that point, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to be a navigator on board the E-4B, which is a military variant of the Boeing 747, but that's where the comparison stops. The E-4B is primarily designed to be a national command and control platform and to ensure the continuity of the federal government in the event of a national emergency. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, I was assigned working as the senior executive officer for the support group at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. When I had just come into work, I saw on CNN, on the television that we had on in the background, an airplane had just hit the World Trade Center. As a professional aviator, I knew right away that there's no way that this was an accident, even though the news broadcasters were speculating that it might be. Shortly thereafter, I got called upon to leap into action and to coordinate the response actions for our base. And we found out, as a matter of fact, that later that day, the President of the United States would be arriving at our base in Air Force One. So I was helping to coordinate security cordons, as well as coordinating a lot of the emergency response actions taking place on the base and elevating the base security level. So I was trying to do this with a clear head, meanwhile watching, my own city in flames and unsure about, the livelihood or whether my friends were, alive or dead back in New York. After watching the first aircraft strike the World Trade Center on the news, I immediately called back home to my wife and asked her to get a quick call back to New York to make sure that my family was okay and make sure that none of them were in downtown Manhattan at that point in time. She did that, and I'm glad that we did it then, because shortly thereafter all the phone lines went down and I was no longer able to contact my family back in New York. That day I worked furiously trying to coordinate actions on the base, all the time hoping that somehow I could get back in the airplane and get back to do the mission that I felt was my strong suit, which was flying in support of this country's response to the 9/11 attacks. On September 12th, the day after the attack, I finally received the phone call at work that I'd been waiting for. It was my flying unit calling to talk to my boss and asking that Major Lange come back to the cockpit to serve as a navigator. At that point in time, we were bringing up all three of our National Airborne Operations Center jets to send them out again to ensure continuity, because we were anticipating possible future attacks on this country, and we wanted to make sure we had all our airborne command posts up and operational. So this was one of the most unique flying experiences of my life. Getting on board an airplane, taking off when basically the entire skies of the United States had been cleared of aircraft. All the air traffic control centers were silent. It was complete silence on the radios. And basically the air traffic control centers were telling us we could go wherever we wanted at whatever altitude we wanted and do whatever we wanted to do, which was unheard of. And this was definitely the most surrealistic flying I'd ever done in my life. During the period that I was in the NAOC post 9/11, we were told that we were not allowed to make any phone calls out so that people couldn't track where the aircraft was, and no one could know where we were, and no one could know where we would when we would return. So basically, for almost a month, I was gone. My wife and children had no idea where I was at and had no idea, if I was okay or not. And I had no way to contact them. And perhaps worse yet, I had no idea if any of my friends back in New York were alive or dead. I have a lot of friends, as many of us did, that worked in the business district. And seeing the horrific aftermath of the attacks, again, I just didn't know. So this whole time was very emotional for me. I stayed focused on the mission, stayed focused on the job, but in the back of my mind, sometimes I was fighting back the tears, just because I didn't know, what the situation was back home. And it was very difficult, but again, I was very proud to do that mission and to ensure the continuity of government for the country. In our post 9/11 response, flying in the E-4B, we did what I like to refer to as a shell game. All the activated jets were bouncing around between different bases, again, trying to be unpredictable so that we could not be targeted by an enemy. It was an emotional time for me, and at one base we were at, rather than eating at the chow halls, which we had been doing, we elected to eat at an officers club. They happened to have a live piano player there, and as I was very emotional about the attack, I went up to the piano player and asked her if she might play New York, New York on the piano for me. Not only did she do that, but without being asked, she played On Broadway and New York State of Mind and just about any other New York related song that she could think of. And that really helped to sort of ease my mind and made me feel good inside, which was very helpful. Obviously, I tipped her quite well after the fact, but to me, that was one of the special moments during my time on the road with our post 9/11 response. Normally, as an aircrew member, when you're sick, you simply don't fly. You don't want to put yourself at risk. You don't want to put the aircraft at risk. After 9/11, because it was an emergency situation, we knew they needed all of us on board to be doing our job. At one point, I developed a very bad fever. In fact, I think I got about 104 degrees in my temperature, and I was quite sick. I went to bed one night thinking that I would finally get some rest and shake this. But unfortunately, shortly after midnight on this particular evening, the klaxon sounded with the report to aircraft coming over the radios. We all ran out to the jet, and meanwhile, our commander was at the ladder of the jet yelling at us that this was real and we needed to hurry up and get on board as fast as we could. So there I was, shaking and trembling. I'd barely been able to lace up my boots running out to the jet at night. Got on board, we fired up the engines, and we took off. They had what they thought was a real-world threat in our vicinity. And so it was such a desperate situation that we actually left a large number of our crew members who were considered non-mission essential behind. They were either chow hauled or racing in their trucks to try to get to the aircraft. Instead, they saw a big white 747 take off into the night sky. And that was quite the amazing experience. And again, my hand was trembling as I was trying to write notes in my navigation log and to do computations while we were in the air. But I'll never forget that evening. After 29 days on the road following 9/11, my crew and I finally returned back to our home base. During that time, as I'd mentioned, my family was completely unaware where I was at, and they really did not know when they could expect me home. So when I met up with my wife, we decided we would go together to pick up my son in kindergarten. And if you've ever seen those videos of the family reunions with military members, this was kind of one of those special moments for me that I'll never forget. I showed up at the kindergarten where my son was always straight and narrow. He always followed the rules, so he was marching in line with the rest of his classmates coming back from the gymnasium with the teacher. Their orders were in the hallway never to talk, and to never break out of line. I could tell that he was really struggling with it as they were walking, and when he saw me, he finally couldn't resist anymore. So he broke out of the line, came running over to me and gave me a huge hug, and then instantly ran back to the line. Of course, his teacher understood what was going on and the meaning of my return back home, and so she immediately released my son to come back out and see me. But I always remember that special moment of my son running out to give me a hug, kind of with tears in his eyes, and that was one of my favorite moments of my Air Force career. Shortly after my post 9/11 return in the E-4B, the United States government began Operation Enduring Freedom, which is operations in Afghanistan to try to oust the Taliban and to get rid of Al-Qaeda. During the 20 years since then, America has pretty much been at constant war, and there's been vast changes in the nature of war. We went from more of a bipolar focus with strategic deterrence to going back to counterinsurgency operations that we really hadn't experienced since the Vietnam War. During this period, we also saw lots of young, wonderful men and women, Americans, want to contribute to do something to make sure that this never happened again. So we had record numbers of recruits joining the military, and also we saw incredible advancements in technology, everything from satellite communications and reconnaissance techniques to armored vehicles to protect troops from IEDs and other threats. So we saw a revolution in warfare and how we fight it. 17 years after the attacks of September 11th, 2001, I retired from the United States Air Force after 30 years of active duty service. During that time, I've seen incredible developments and changes in the way we fight war, whether it's from the advanced satellite systems, navigation systems, or communications that we use, to the advanced airframes. But probably the most significant thing I've seen is just the a change in the personnel. I've seen countless young men and women come to join our service, all of them with some story to tell about how 9/11 either affected them directly or indirectly, or impacted friends of theirs, and they all wanted to do something to give back to this country. And they all wanted to do something to make a difference. And some of the best and brightest are currently serving in our military. And honestly, as I retired, I had a good feeling in my heart that I was leaving the service in good hands.